Greetings. I am your professor, Professor Robert Frank, for Intermediate Algebra taught online. Online Intermediate Algebra is one of the courses in a 3-course sequence that we offer at the college. Foundations of Algebra, Math 052. I assume you've met the requirements of Math for Foundations of Algebra. That is a prerequisite to this course. Of course, our course is Intermediate Algebra, Math 100, and I'll be talking about some of the topics later. If you go on in algebra, you'll be taking College Algebra, Math 157. This is primarily for STEM majors, science, technology, engineering, and math, but it's also for related majors, such as nursing. Nurses, if they're going to do a bachelor's degree in nursing, are going to want to take the full sequence of algebra courses. We will be starting our intermediate algebra course with an important concept that is significant for all of mathematics, and that would be the concept of a function. A function is an abstract conception, and it is actually the subject for the first 2 sections of our textbook as we go forward. So I'll be talking about that in a later video. I wanted to fill you in a little bit on the history of algebra, where it came from, and why do we do it. Algebra dates back to about 1000 BC in the work of Chinese and Indian mathematicians. In China, there was a famous book. We don't know the author, but it contains one of the instances of the Pythagorean theorem. You probably have heard of the Pythagorean theorem. It's one of the 2 or 3 most famous theorems in all of mathematics. Well, in this Chinese book, the Pythagorean theorem was presented without proof. Now, you might know this and you might not. Mathematicians insist on absolute proof before a theorem is acceptable. You can't just think that you know it's true. You have to be able to prove that it's true. So for that reason, we usually attribute the Pythagorean theorem to Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras lived around 450 BC, so he was more than 500 years later. He discovered this on his own and actually did the first proof. Interestingly enough, and you might wonder about this, why do mathematicians, if they've proven something, want to prove it again and again and again? This theorem has been proven by more people in different ways than any other theorem in the history of math. Up until the present time, there have been 370 different proofs that have been published for Pythagoras' theorem. The first by Pythagoras, 369 other mathematicians have proven it, including, interestingly enough, one U.S. president. The 20th president of the United States was James Garfield, and while he was in Congress before being elected to be president, he actually published a proof of the Pythagorean theorem. So my opinion is that James Garfield is the smartest of the presidents, not what you may have heard recently. The Greeks did a lot in the area of mathematics in general, but algebra in specific. And they applied their algebra to geometry and engineering primarily. The Babylonians in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley applied their knowledge of algebra to doing star charts and calculating astronomical data. And so the Greeks and the Babylonians were both instrumental. But I want to take you until the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, right around 775 AD, there was a caliph of Baghdad. Now this is the city of Baghdad that still exists today in Iraq. At the time, 775, it was an ancient city already. And the caliph invited scholars from all over the world to come to Baghdad and maintain the knowledge of science, engineering, mathematics, and even poetry. One of the famous mathematicians of the time, Omar Khayyam, was actually instrumental in both poetry and mathematics during this time period. It's during the late 7th century, throughout the 8th century, and on into the early 9th century that mathematic people and scientists gathered in Baghdad to preserve and extend the knowledge that had been accumulated by Greeks and by Chinese and by the workers in India. And one of those people that was invited to Baghdad was Al-Khwarizmi. He became known in Europe as Algoritza. A little bit easier to pronounce, probably. And Algoritza is where we get the word algorithm. I'll tell you a little bit more about an algorithm later. But in the meantime, I wanted to tell you where algebra comes from. Al-Khwarizmi, or Algoritza, wrote a book. In Arabic, it's Hijab al-Jabar. Guess what? Al-Jabar is where we get our word algebra from. And it simply means the science of the method. The method to do what? Well, it's the method to do algebra, basically. This book is one of the top 10 most influential books of civilization in the first millennia. So it's a very important book. And it's where algebra comes from. Now, to algorithm, we are going to be studying in intermediate algebra many algorithms for doing algebra. What is an algorithm? It's a mathematical recipe. Just like a recipe to cook something like beef bourguignon, a mathematical recipe sets down the steps that you need in order to be able to accomplish a particular purpose. So we are going to be studying the algorithms named after Algoritza and found in the book Algebra as we go through the course. I hope that you'll be interested in doing the mathematical recipes just as you're interested in doing the cooking recipes that we all like. Thank you.